But yes, so going on to the next part. As John kind of alluding to, talking some trending teams. You already mentioned the Suns, one of those teams that are on a tear right now. I mean, the Nuggets were on a tear. I think you mentioned they're on a they're on a trying to, what was it? They're on a win streak, like a 7 game win streak before that all happened with with Jamal Murray. So yeah, any other teams? I mean, I know Philly just got Embiid back. That's a team that's starting to get back in the picture. Your Celtics have I feel like won a few tough games. My Spurs have been on the opposite side of trending well. Lost some tough games. Lost a tough one to Portland as of last night. And lost two to the Nuggets, I believe, in that back to back. So we're hanging on the edge there. But yeah, and any teams that are hot to you right now that maybe we should be worried about.
Well,
We as
as
in
you
like
know,
everyone.
yeah, when we talk about teams on this podcast, they tend to do pretty well afterwards.
Especially if we talk bad
Or
about them. Teams and players is the
yeah,
different
if we
part
talk
first.
bad about stuff, they tend to do the opposite of that. We had our remarks about the Clippers, and honestly, I mean which this was even in the midst of us talking about it, but the Clippers have just quietly been performing very well over the last week. I mean, they had that really intense game against the Suns. I can't remember if that was like right before. I think that was like right before we did the pod. But regardless, I mean, the Clippers have looked solid, but that's not super surprising. I mean, the two main teams that come to mind, or the three main teams that come to mind when it comes to this trending thing, is number one, the Celtics. They've won 7 of their last 8. Albeit, I mean, these were games against like the Timberwolves. These are games like the Lakers without LeBron or AD or Drummond. So there were some ones in there that weren't necessarily super competitive, but they beat the Blazers, which is a playoff team. Um, they beat, I can't remember who else they beat. I'd have to look at their schedule
I'll pull it up.
over the last few
I'm right
games,
here.
but they beat the Nuggets. I mean, they blew the Nuggets out. That one was the surprising one. They held the Nuggets to 87 points. And the Nuggets were on a 7 game win streak. Like you said, this is what ended that 7 game win streak. And they only allowed 8 points to the Nuggets in the fourth quarter after going on I believe, 31-3 run.
Yeah.
That was a wild game.
Y'all beat
I
the
mean, they
Knicks
beat
by
the
two.
yeah, beat the Knicks. That's a playoff team right there. So anyway, they've been looking good. Some horrible teams like the Rockets and Timberwolves they beat, but also some solid teams. So they've been on a little bit of a stretch right now. I saw something that I think Tatum is the NBA's leading scorer since the All-Star break, and then Jalen Brown's like 6th on there or something like that. So I just thought that was interesting. Those two guys since the All-Star break have really stepped up to get this team going. I mean, even against that Lakers team, like I said, they're shorthanded, but Jalen Brown had like 40 points on like 17 of 20 shooting, which is pretty crazy. So they've been doing good. The Suns, I think, to me, are really interesting. I know that you and I have been pretty hot on them all year, but they're just continuing it. I mean, I don't know their exact record right now. I'm gonna pull it up. They are
Sorry, I just left that screen. Very poor.
the Suns. They're 40-15. They're 1.5 games out of first place in the entire NBA. And the Jazz right now are in a close one with the Lakers. So yeah, the Suns have been really impressive. We just posted about Chris Paul yesterday. Over his last 4 games, 40 assists, only 1 turnover. The Suns, I mean, they're just figuring it out. I think that as we talked about before the season, and it's just coming to fruition, is that Chris Paul has put everybody into their respective roles that they're now comfortable in that they didn't necessarily have before that. Devin Booker can just focus on being a scorer. He doesn't have to try and facilitate for the rest of the team at, like, to a level that's just not his comfort zone. He can just do him and facilitate, through his scoring. Uh, Deandre Ayton, I mean, he's looked just fantastic this year when it comes to the pick and rolls and all this kind of different stuff that Chris Paul's able to work with him on. And so that's been great. So the Suns overall, they've really impressed me. I am interested to see how they'll do come playoff time,
That's my biggest
because
concern is
yeah,
especially Aiton because you talked about it. He's been solid, but I mean for the number one overall pick and the guy we thought coming out. I know it's only his third year or fourth year, but still,
mm-hmm.
like, we just haven't seen that jump of or moments, that many moments of dominance, and especially with a guy his size. I mean, we see the muscles, the strength, but it just seems like I don't want to call him soft because it just seems like it's all not there,
Mm.
and especially come playoff time, and you're gonna have to play the Jokic's and even it's he's not great offensively. Rudy Gobert's on one end, and then AD's and even solid defensive guys like Jakob Poeltl for my Spurs. Will Ayton, especially if it gets a game where maybe CP3 and Booker are struggling, Ayton's technically the third. I would say the third guy, right? Can he get them some buckets in crunch time? I'm not confident in that, and that's the only thing at least right now. But I could be proven wrong. But I think that's the biggest. That would be the biggest hurdle for the Suns if Deandre Ayton. I don't want to say can come to play, but you know what I mean. Could step up and be, just be more aggressive on both ends of the floor come playoff time. I think that so we'll see because their depth behind him is not great either. It's not like if he's struggling, they can bring in. I mean, they have Dario Saric and Frank Kaminsky. No offense to those guys, but not great, especially on the defensive end. So I think that's the only
Yeah,
the
that
only caveat for the Suns. I mean, so at least come
yeah.
playoff time.
Also, they're just one of those teams that doesn't necessarily have like that superstar top 10 level player, which a lot of teams out west do. I mean, the Jazz are also like that. So those two teams are similar in that respect. But like the Clippers, they have Kawhi. The Nuggets, they have Jokic. The Lakers, LeBron and AD. Portland, they have Damian. Dallas, they have Luca. I mean, a lot of these teams, if Golden State gets in, they have Steph. A lot of these teams have that sort of player that is just going to go ballistic and can really will their team to victory. I think that with their construction and makeup, Devin Booker can be the guy who does that sort of role for them.
Hmm.
But once again, we just haven't seen Booker really in the. I don't have has Booker even made the playoffs with the Suns since he's gotten there?
I don't believe
I don't
so.
think
I know
so.
they were close last year, but they didn't.
Yeah,
They didn't. I think didn't they go 8-0 in the bubble and still miss out because I
yeah.
think Portland went like 7-1.
Yeah, Portland beat the Nets, and then so they got into that play-in game with the Grizzlies, and then
Yeah.
Portland won and made it. So yeah, I don't. We just haven't seen Devin Booker in the playoffs, so we don't know what we're gonna get out of him. I mean, it could be a Jamal Murray level explosion, or you never know. I mean, because the playoffs are just a whole different beast when it comes to a series against a team that is studying to beat you over and
Yeah.
over and over, and they're going to really dissect you. So yeah, the Suns are going to be really interesting because it's Chris Paul, the veteran, and then a lot of these young guys who just haven't been there. But I mean, they're absolutely trending in the right direction for me. If they can snag that one seed, I think that would be big for them because then they get home court advantage throughout the playoffs, which I don't know what the fan situation is going to look like a month and a half from now. But I mean, if they have a good amount of fans there, then that's pretty huge for this young team's first ever playoff series, being able to ride that momentum. So the other team that was I mean, I thought about them when it came to like trending in the right direction. I mean, was the Mavericks, but
Mhm.
over the last week or so, they've sort of cooled off. They were like winning. I think they'd won like 6 out of their last 7 at one point. Then they lost like 3 straight.
Yeah, one of
And
those losses was
now,
to us, and then I think
yeah,
they lost the other night to Philly. I don't know. It was after Luca made that crazy buzzer beater. They lost to the
yeah,
Knicks, I think,
yeah,
which was last night. I think Julius dropped 42, which was
hmm
another team like you mentioned, the Knicks. Not been like on a hot tear, but they've just been solid enough where they're sitting there. They're sitting pretty in terms of playoffs, especially from
right,
that, considering that they didn't make the playoffs last year.
right. And so yeah, I mean, just the interesting point, of course, which we haven't fully talked about right now, is that there is this sort of play-in scenario
Hmm.
that's going on with the playoffs, and so the 7 and 8 seeds are not safe, which is why the comments about Luca, he made comments about how this play-in thing's kind of dumb because he plays 72 games, and all of a sudden that's not good enough, and if you lose 2 straight, then you're out of the playoffs. So it's an interesting, scenario of
But
where
I
we think
mean,
these teams are going to finish.
if because everything pans out the way it is right now, it's like if the playoffs started today, I think the Mavs are the 7th seed, my Spurs are the 10th, so
Right.
they'd play. So isn't it like the higher or technically the higher seed being the 7th seed, higher seed only has to win one game of the three, while the lower seed has to win two, correct? So I mean, I get why he's a little upset, but it's like you have to win one game. You got it. You got to win one, like as opposed to two. And maybe if you started off better in the season, earlier because remember they were outside the whole picture the first month or two. They
Right.
were really struggling. So I mean, yes, I understand you play 82 games or 72, whatever. But you got to win those games, unfortunately. And I know I'm sure he gives 100% every time, but it's just you got to maybe next year. This is why you start off better. And I know injuries and things happen, but I I, I don't want to sound like a hater. I just win one, man. It's just try to win one. It's not that big of a deal, in my opinion. I know, and is it
Yeah.
only maybe for this season too? I feel like, or is this a thing going forward?
I I th- I feel like it's just for this
I feel
season
like it
because
is too.
typically
Just,
they do 82 games, but they're only doing 72 for this year.
I
So
mean,
I think this is sort of like their attempt to make sure that that final 10 games that they normally would have, where like a 9 seed sneaks into the playoffs, where that isn't necessarily, an argument that can be brought up for some of those teams. So but yeah, the way that the play-in works is the 7 plays the 8 seed, right? So one of those teams is guaranteed to make the playoffs.
oh, okay.
And then the loser of that game plays the winner of the
The
9
nine
10.
ten. Okay, so
So, but once again, you just have to win one game because
the lower seed, whoever wins the
the
lower
lower
seeds
seed,
has to win twice.
they have to win twice to get in. You only have to
Gotcha.
win once. You have to beat, which currently they would have to play the Grizzlies
Hmm.
if the standing stayed. And if you can't beat the Grizzlies, then you would play the winner of the Warriors Spurs. And
Spurs.
none of those games are easy because we know the Western Conference is a bloodbath. But uh, once again, they only have to win one game. So yeah, it
Yeah.
is what it is, as opposed to having to win another, be competitive in another 10. Uh, I hear his point because it does seem weird. Like, okay, we played 72 games and now you want to do this sort of gimmick thing. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. It's happening. So why complain about it? Like, it's not
No,
going to
there's
change
nothing you can
anything.
do.
And that's not like the right mindset that you want to have your team going in with. Of our leader, our best player is saying, well, this is stupid. We shouldn't have to play this. And then all of a sudden, like Memphis upsets you or something.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this too. It keeps. I mean, because of COVID, some games have been canceled. But I think for the NBA, for their point, it keeps teams that otherwise wouldn't even be in contention. Like right now, just looking at the standings. I mean, you mentioned my Spurs are at 10. It would be the 10th seed. I mean, New Orleans is only 2 games behind them, and theoretically, Sacramento is 5 games behind the Spurs, so 3 games behind New Orleans. So they're still in it, or mathematically in it. And so I mean, yeah, it keeps more teams. I guess keeps it. It keeps it more competitive going longer. There's a lot more teams that have a horse in the race because we've seen.
Right.
I mean, I don't want to call anybody out, but OKC, I don't think Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's injured, but he hasn't played in a couple of weeks. I think OKC team like OKC is already mailing it in. You know what I mean? I don't
Yeah.
want to call just kind of playing all their young
I
guys and
mean, they shut down Al Horford, which he's older, so I know that he probably wants to preserve like his
time.
competitive
Yeah.
years, but also they didn't cut him, like they shut him down.
Yeah, so like things like that, I think is just what the NBA is trying to avoid. Just to hey, you still got a shot, so if you want, you can still play your guys and maybe make the
Right.
playoffs, make some noise. So and obviously for these owners, hey, you'll get more tickets sales because you make the playoffs. So yeah,
And
go
even
ahead.
out east,
Oh,
to
out
your
east is a
point,
bloodbath.
like
I'm looking at that right
I
now.
mean, all the way down to like Cleveland is still probably in this. I would say Orlando and Detroit are probably out because they're a good amount of games behind Indiana and Toronto. But like Toronto is sitting at the 10th seed with 23 wins. Chicago and Washington both have 22, and then Cleveland has 20. So realistically, any of those teams, I think Indiana is probably like going to finish out and be within that 9, 10,
They
maybe
just
even
gotta
8
they
range
just gotta get
because,
everyone on the court. They've had like
yeah,
Miles
because
Turner
Charlotte
out.
obviously
Sorry, go ahead.
LaMelo's hurt, so he's Charlotte might potentially miss out on this 8th spot, but
I
I
agree.
mean that 10 spot is incredibly competitive for the East, and obviously I think a lot of people would love to see a Levine Vucevic play-in series or a Russell Westbrook Bradley Beal attempt or something like that. So it does make it sort of competitive to where at least in the Eastern Conference, there's really only 2 teams that are out of that potential play-in spot.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna mention that. I mean, and like of those three, I feel like I would want to see either Chicago or Washington. No offense to Toronto, but it just seems like they've basically
Agreed.
shut down Kyle Lowry too. I haven't really seen him play much. And we end up losing to their bench unit still, which I don't want to talk about. Um, but yeah, I mean, a team like Washington, we're seeing, they're starting to turn it around now that they're not dealing with all the COVID issues, and they're starting to gel as a team. And we always know that Russell in the playoffs is, It's always fun to watch, especially him. It'd be a tough matchup, especially him and Embiid. They have a little bit of a history in that first round if he manages to get his team into that 8th spot. But yeah, I would agree with you. I don't think Charlotte. I think Charlotte will fall. I'm not sure if they'll fall out of the top 10 completely, but ever since Lamelo's been out, it's just been it hasn't. I think Gordon Hayward's also injured too, so it just seems like they probably fall out of the playoff picture or not make much noise. But yeah, and I was saying with Indiana with the Pacers, like it just seems like they take 2 steps forward and then 1 step back, just from what I've seen in the season. Like, oh, they start figuring out they look like a really good team, and then, oh, someone got injured. Whether it's Sabonis or Brogdon, or obviously, oh, we finally got Karis LeVert back, but then we lose this person. Oh no, and now we lost Miles Turner. So they'll be an interesting team now that I think they have a bona fide perimeter scorer again, because they had that with Oladipo a couple years ago. But then obviously last year he was 100%, and Brogdon's good, but they just needed a second piece. So hopefully they can put that together. But yeah, the East is looking pretty interesting. I mean, the Hawks, ever since their coaching change, they're all the way up to the 4 seed now, which I didn't even know until looking at this. So I mean, the Bucks. Where no one's talking about the Bucks, the fact that they're just sitting at the 3rd seed. So I think this is I think we can say too nowadays that the East is pretty competitive too. It's no longer just oh, there's like 2 or 3 teams in the East. Like there's at least 4 or 5. I mean, maybe even 6. 'Cause the Heat are sitting at the 7th seed. That teams that you could say, hey, they can make the finals and make some noise. Especially once again, like we mentioned before, like in regards to defending champs, the Lakers. I think AD is supposed to come back in a week or two, but then LeBron still, we don't know the timetable. So yeah, it could get very interesting. I think this is going to be one of the more wide open playoff years that we've seen, especially with that play on. So I'm glad the play-in's in this year, just because and with all the COVID and stuff. But there's just a lot of good teams this year, so I think it's a really good year to do that. Trying to
Yeah, I think it also makes the bottom half of the playoff seedings more competitive because now you don't want to have to play those games. You don't want to be 7. You don't want to be 8. You're competing like we want to be 5. We want to be 6.
You want to get 4 more
Um,
days off, and then so we can rest and game plan.
exactly. And I mean, like we talked about with the East, the difference between the Heat at 7 and the Hawks at 4 is like it's 2 games. So it's really not that big of a difference. Even looking at the West, I mean, going from like the Mavericks all the way at 7 with 30 wins, they're only 5 games back from being in 4th seed. So it's I think it adds a little competitive spice that we didn't necessarily have. Like you said, with games canceled, shorter season, all this kind of stuff. And so it should be interesting.